all the scale armor from Roman sites that was meant for battle, the scales are locked together side to side. They overlap. They have metal staples going through the holes to hold them together. So the rows are very strong. And then they're sewn separately to a backing so that they overlap on the way down. This is not a weak armor, and it's quite common from Roman contexts. My guess is that it was less flexible than mail, but offered more protection. The big thing that people think about is stabbing up through the rows. But if the rows are tight, it's to lift, you can't lift one scale by itself. You've got to lift the whole row up. And like the lamellar, stabbing down into the lamellar, you can do it if you've got the leverage and nobody's fighting back. I mean, finishing off somebody who's unconscious in any kind of armor is relatively straightforward. But if they're fighting back, you don't get the opportunity to stand there and, cut your way in. And I think this is where people, you can't blame people for, if they don't have any experience of grappling and things like that, for overestimating the amount of time you've got to do things.
Yeah, of course.
The whole purpose, the thing I found out about lamellar armor wearing it was how flexible you were. Now, I hear people saying, oh, I can wear European plate armor all day and I'm okay. And I'm impressed. I think that most people totally enclosed in metal armor for 4 hours would be getting close to heat stroke, even if they were just sitting around, because of the way it restricts the body's ability to transfer heat. I mean, it's very good to stop people from stabbing you, but I think one of the purposes of harassing mounted archers was to keep people in their armor all day, so that they were in no condition to fight at the end of the day. I don't know. We look at things. Is it total protection? I mean, Henry VIII's armor has got lots of little sliding plates and everything that you can't get into it anywhere. But it was for fighting in tournaments where you expected to come out alive. So you had extra protection. I mean, the German jousting armors with these massive pieces of metal that bolted onto the front. I mean, it's because these are very rich people indulging in the sport. It's different from what you wear in battle, where you've got to carry it around all day. And I will admit, as we've discussed in previous things, most people didn't wear their armor all the time. They only put it on just before they went into battle. And the trick was to make people wear it more than they should by harassing them and making it, like, this is the whole thing about raining arrows down on people.
Pete, I have another question. In your armor, do you have leg protection and arm protection, or a helmet?
Yeah, the full lamellar, the Jorshan is meant to be worn with something like a brigandine.
Okay.
So that would be a below knee coat with metal plates riveted into the inside of it. Karkal?
Yes.
Something, yeah. Or even a kazagan with mail in between layers of padding. And you'd wear that on top to protect that part of your body that is very, very susceptible to damage.
Yeah.
And the shoulder guards are basically extra protection against striking blows. The thing is, those shoulder guards are much better at taking a blunt force blow because they move against each other and they disperse the force of it. Whereas if you're wearing mail under there and you get a blunt force blow, a heavy sword, a mace, an axe, even if it doesn't penetrate the mail, it's going to break bones under it. Whereas
and know what I like about what you made? As an experienced martial artist, I say that, but okay, this is also in Japanese tradition, in swordsmanship, you can use them like a shield by going to the side, like a shield, and then you can strike.
One of my Chinese friends said that when he put on the armor and went into the spear stance, I'm not wearing the armor, so I'm going to stand up and do it. When he put on the armor and went into one of the spear stances, you do that, and that whole thing covers that. So you've got the armor that goes around there, then your arm, then that. It's very hard to get in.
Yes.
Your vital organs, your lungs, your kidneys down further, your heart. They can't get through.
And you can use it, you know, once you have the strike here and then you slide, then you can counter strike. So that's what I love these things, right?
I think that a person that was well trained in their use of sword, spear, particularly spear, because you can do really serious damage if you've got a spear and you're not. I mean, the whole point of most Middle Eastern spear techniques is they're two-handed.
Yeah.
So you want armor that's going to protect you. Most swordsmen fought with shields because they had that spare hand. But if you have a strong armor that, you know, really protects you when you're coming in with a strong spear bow, you're going to feel a lot happier. One of the things I'm going to try and make over the next month or so is so this Aventail essentially sits around the helmet and gives you protection like around there. And it gives you complete neck movement without exposing anything. But they're also the ones that came right around the face.
Yeah. You know,
and
yeah, go ahead.
Well,
you know, for example, for Japanese tradition, also not only for yari or naginata, also for katana, many people always say, oh, they don't use a shield. Well, they have shield here, you know, for a katana.
Oh,
and their design technique, you know, that's the reason.
You can actually see they've got attachments at the back of those big shoulder guards that go to a ring on the back of the armor to stop the shoulder guards from coming round. They're definitely meant for doing that.
Yeah.
And it's like if you see people reconstructing Japanese armor now, they'll have people fighting on foot with the thigh guards on, the haidate.
Yeah.
But if you read the old Japanese books on armor, you only wore those on horseback because they got in the way, because they wanted to be nimble when they were on foot. And I mean, they'd be good in sieges or something where you're getting pelted with arrows and whatever. But in general speaking, the Japanese were happy to go barefoot in battle. They weren't worried about, you know, they reckon they could keep their legs moving pretty well. I don't know if I'd feel comfortable, but they had tsuneate. They had shin guards.
Yeah.
And certainly the earlier armors, like the Oyore and some of the Gosuko type armors, the kuzazuri, the skirts, actually went down almost as far as the knee anyway, so they didn't need haidate. It's only when the kuzazuri became mid-thigh that the old armors didn't have special leg armors. I mean, in Keiko, before the standard Japanese armor developed, their form of the early Lamellar, they did have long skirts on them, just like everywhere else in Asia did. But the Japanese really developed their own system for doing everything. They were very good at innovating. It's sometimes misleading to say, oh, the Japanese did this, this is Lamellar, and therefore every Lamellar is like that. Certainly not. Japanese scales have different hole patterns than any other kind of Lamellar. They very rapidly got into the thing where they made the body rigid and the skirts flexible, whereas originally the body and the skirts were fairly rigid. They also started to work out ways of distributing the weight better. And then when gunpowder was introduced, they worked out ways of making really strong upper body protection, like, well, abdominal and lower chest protection. There's lots of gaps in Japanese armor. They weren't designed to be like European armor, a fortress that you were, you know, impenetrable in.
Yeah.
But you know, it's like I was last year, I think, I was looking at these armors that had the full face covering Lamellar. And it suddenly occurred to me that particularly well illustrated in Ilkhanate paintings and in Chinese paintings from the Sung dynasty to the early Ming, is that occasionally you'd see people wearing full armor and they had a helmet on, but it seemed to have a really large brim and there was no neck guard. It turns out what happens is, because this stuff is so flexible, you can just tie it up and have a single row of scales going around your helmet as a sunshade. And you just pull a string and the whole thing falls down and you've got a full neck guard. And then I went back through looking at all these paintings and, oh, yeah, you know, you could see it. You know, some guys that had their helmets up because they're the guys that had to see what was going on. The guys that were going to charge into battle had the aventail all the way down and you could just see their eyes. And these are all things that you can do with this type of armor that it's very difficult to do with others. I mean, I've seen Chinese scale armors where the skirts of the armor, which cover the thighs and the knees, had rings on them halfway down, so you could attach cords to those rings and pull them up to your waist and shorten the armor by half, so that on foot you could run. So there's all kinds of flexibilities. And when you see, and this is important in Persian paintings, when you see things that look odd, look really carefully and see if they're doing something with the armor that you can only do with one type of armor. See, Iran was making mail for more than 1,000 years before the Mongols arrived. So they knew all the tricks about mail. I see a lot of people talking about the expense of mail because of the enormous number of man hours to put a mail shirt together. But you've got to look in terms of economies of scale if you've got an actual industry doing this. Plus the fact that labor was cheap. People would work for food and enough money to occasionally go out and have a good time. We're not looking at people who were working 8-hour days or 9-hour days. We're looking at people that were given, I'm guessing, but were given a bag full of mail rings and told, go home and make me a panel that's this big by this big by this big. There's actual photographs from mail makers in India making mail in the late 19th century, traditionally. And it's when you see people doing these things, you realize everything is organized really well. It's a production process. So mail, scale, lamellar, laminated, all these things were designed for mass production. Because if you were, say you were the state and you wanted to equip an army, if it was mail that you were going to do, you could just order hundreds of thousands of rings and then have other people put them together. It wouldn't all be in one shop. And this is, I think, because we're doing these things by ourselves, we tend to get sidetracked into thinking, oh, how hard it is to do this because I've got to do everything. But if it's split up between 20 or 30 people and you've got 5 guys making the mail or 5 guys making the scales and 5 guys punching the holes and 5 guys lacing them together and another 5 guys fitting them and getting them set out as a complete thing and adding the extra straps and all that kind of stuff, it can become quite fast and quite economic. And when you think of the size of some of these armies and the amount of armor that must have been made.
Bede, do you have any other piece of armor you would like to show us?
I'm just trying to think now because I do have a helmet put together, but it's not. I can't get to it at the moment, unfortunately.
But it doesn't matter. But you can make a video. We can then put it here. And,
yeah. Well, that's what I'll do because I want to lay these things out. And I mean, when we do it this way, I can show you stuff, but it's all in the concept of a zoom camera. Whereas if I get a proper video camera at high resolution and do it and lay it out and you know, put a ruler next to it so you can see how big things are and stuff like that, I think it'll work quite well.
Perfect.
But I've got to say, I've seen quite a bit of lamellar being made. And even though sometimes I think there are more efficient ways of making it, it really does look very good. The artistic level of the production that I've seen people make is very high. Whether it's that early kind of Western lamellar that eventually ended up in the Visby mass burials, which led to a lot of people making lamellar, or it's more complex ones from Central Asia or whatever. They look really good, and most of them work, even if they're not done totally traditionally. They still work, and I think this is critical. If you can, I mean, the laminated armor is more difficult to make in the sense that you've got to actually design the pieces to be a particular shape. They've got to curve around the body. They've got to have hinges or whatever, or what I did. But so that requires a greater level of design and control. Whereas the lamellar, you can just make thousands of scales and people can put them together as they see fit. But the fact is that laminated armor became really popular. And the only thing that superseded it was plate and mail. And I think the reason plate and mail superseded it was that you can put it in a barrel of oil and leave it for 50 years and take it out and clean it, and it's still working. Whereas the other one, you've got to make sure that insects don't eat it and all these other things that could go wrong.
Yes.
I think that I've got here. I'm not sure. This is a book on painting from Azerbaijan, and I think it's got these are this is published in the Soviet Union. So this is a long time ago, so the quality of the painting is, or the quality of the printing is not so good. I'm trying to find one where it's got a early plate and mail. Because you can see that relationship. See, have a look at that. I don't know if this is going to work. Can you see the horsemen with their plate and mail?
Yeah.
Well, this painting, this is the battle between Fatimurs and Bayman. So this would be Safavid, I would say. The horses are completely armored, and the armor is horizontal rectangular plates joined by strips of mail.
Yeah.
But so are the men, and sometimes the mail is shown as gilded. But what's interesting is that it has a feel of an adaptation of lamellar or laminated armor. That people in Iran, particularly the armorers, were saying, well, yeah, but we can make this a different way that might be more effective or less bulky. Because I've worn a 17th century plate and mail armor, and it's surprisingly, this is when I was a lot thinner, surprisingly comfortable. And it was from Bijapur. It was from the big armory that they opened up, and thousands of armors were there that have been sitting there for 400 years. And this is the kind of thing, you know, I'm talking about. The change wasn't from one effective armor to a more effective armor. The change was from an effective armor to an armor as good, but had much better storage capabilities, and was much more suited for large centralized armies. And that kept on being used in various forms right into the 19th century, because it's good at stopping swords. It's reasonable at stopping spears. I mean, you have to be a really good spearman to get a spear through any kind of armor. The thing is not to attack the hard bits. Wait for him to do that and go there, whatever. But the thing is that the development of armor is not necessarily from less protection to more protection. It can be from greater usability. So it's not as heavy to wear, or it's not as hard to look after, or it's easier to repair. Plate and mail is very easy to repair. Lamellar is incredibly easy to repair. You don't need an armorer to repair lamellar. If some straps get cut, or a plate gets bent, anybody with a hammer and a lacing tool, or an awl or whatever, can fix it. You go back to camp and your cousin could pull a hammer out of his kit and tap everything out and lace it back together in 30 minutes. Whereas if you have plate armor on and it gets dented or damaged, then you've got to take it to an armorer and wait for a couple of days to get it back. Yeah. So it's this utility that I'm trying to stress here. It's interesting to know that there are pieces of laminated armor that have survived. I think they're in the Azerbaijan collection at the moment, and they're from the 1200s. The thing is that they're made of multiple thin layers of leather glued together. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about that is I've got a shield which is constructed basically the same way. The thicker layers of leather, but they're glued together and formed and then lacquered to prevent them. This is a dull. This is the standard shield. I might be able to get it down and show you before we finish up, because that is another piece of armor, but it's real as opposed to stuff I've made. I've got a ladder here. If you hear a loud crash, that's me crashing. No, it's not coming down. It's hang. I'll take some photographs of it too.
Sure.
What I'm getting at is that laminating leather, you can make really strong armor.
Yeah.
I mean, these dials from India, which are essentially, I mean, in your book, which is sitting here, there's effectively exactly the same shields being made in Iran.
Yes.
They're incredibly strong. They're very light.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty certain they're fairly cost effective in large numbers.
Yes.
So they would have been made on a mold.
Yes.
I've got one of those little bucklers with that are made from layers of rawhide, and before the layers are put together, they get very fine gold wire and make arabesque patterns, and then they glue it together so it's inside, and you can see it when you hold it up to the light. Yeah. I'm assuming that when they were new, they were almost transparent.
Yes.
But these were for dueling.
Yes. These
were for man-on-man fighting.
Yes.
And these are tough. These are like that thick.
Yeah.
So it's good structures.
Thank you very much. So you're going to send us these videos, so we are going to integrate it then later, right?
I think that would be good.
Thank you very much.
Some of this stuff, when you see it in these kind of confined spaces, it's hard to visualize what it looks like.
Perfect.
And I think that it's well worthwhile. I've got to dig a few things out. We made multi-plate laced helmets.
Yes.
Okay. And things like that. So they, I must admit that I did make mistakes with those because I didn't know what the inside plates look like. So I had to guess, and I went a little bit too artistic on it. Peter Decker's website, Mansions, has a series of photographs of one of these multi-plate helmets from Tibet, from the inside and the outside, which for anyone that was interested in trying to make them would be very good. If you look at particularly the late Ilkhanid and early Julayrid miniatures, you see what are clearly multi-plate helmets. Whereas the Persian tradition would be to take a single sheet of metal and beat it up into a single thing. There are other styles where there's like a band and then a dome inside the band. This is all from the 13th, 14th, 15th century. And there's some of those that even come as far east as Mongolia. So the technology was very transportable. People were learning from each other all the time.
Thank you very much.
I was going to say, I think that separate videos of putting the armor on and how it looks and what you can do in it, well worthwhile.
Thank you very much, Bede, for your input today. It was great showing your armor. It was very beautiful, and I wish you a nice day, Bede. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much too.